Hello, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to today's webinar. It's wonderful to have you all with us. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. We are delighted that you were able to join us. We'll kick off our webinar now. It is being recorded, so just be aware of that by participating in the event that you're giving consent to be recorded. So it is my pleasure to warmly welcome you to our webinar today. My name is Ishbel McWha-Hermann. I'm a Professor of Work and Organisational Psychology at the University of Edinburgh Business School. I also lead the Decent Work stream of the EJWOP Impact Incubator, which is part of EJWOP, so the European Association of Work and Organisational Psychology, and which aims to bridge the gap between academic research and policy on key societal challenges. The Impact Incubator covers a lot of different topics as well as decent work. So we look at things like women and minorities and refugees and migrants. All of the work that we do aims to help shape policy using research from work and organisational psychology. For today's webinar, we have more than 100 participants signed up from 23 countries, which is absolutely fantastic. It is so great to see the depth of interest in this topic and the engagement that we have from all across the globe. We're delighted to have you with us today and invite you to get involved in our ongoing work on this topic. So the webinar today is an opportunity to showcase these 6 research papers that were recently published in the European Journal of Work and Organisational Psychology's special issue on precarious employment and work, understanding the underlying psychological and social processes. We are absolutely delighted to have our 6 presenters today speaking. And the story behind the special issue is that Lisa Seubert, Rosalind, Searle, and Christian Seubert and myself organised a small group meeting in Glasgow in 2023 on the topic of precarious employment and work. And we had such an engaging 3 days with researchers and policymakers coming together to really work on the latest research, to talk about things that are happening in the research space, and to have really constructive discussions on how to shape research to help policy. On the back of that engagement at that meeting, we decided to launch the Power to Power campaign through the EJWOP Impact Incubator. And as part of this in 2024, we also launched a series of 5 briefing papers on the topic of precarious work. These draw on different perspectives and different research that's being undertaken in work and organisational psychology. Now, we designed these briefing papers in a way that makes the research accessible to practitioners and policymakers in this space. If you're interested, there is a recorded webinar on the Impact Incubator website. You can find the link in the Q&A section of the webinar, or I'll give you a link later on as well. At the same time as launching those briefing papers, we decided to put out a call for a special issue on precarious work in order to really encourage and showcase the latest research. And we are delighted by how much interest there was in the special issue. We had a lot of submissions, and we're very pleased to today be able to share these 6 excellent research papers from scholars all around the globe. Now, a couple of pieces of housekeeping before I introduce our first speaker. Firstly, as I said, the session is being recorded, so by being here, you consent to this. We are going to be putting the recording of the session on the EJWOP Impact Incubator website so that people who aren't able to join us today will still be able to hear about this brilliant work. And secondly, questions can be asked throughout the session using the Q&A function in Teams, and we will attempt to respond to these directly in the chat. You can also contact the speakers directly yourself, and I'll give my email address at the end. You can contact me and I will forward your emails on to the relevant speakers as well. Now, to the important part of the session. Here is our list of speakers. Each will be presenting a paper from the recently published special issue. Each speaker will have around 8 minutes to introduce their research. It is very brief, but it will give you a flavour of their work and its importance. And as I said, all the papers are already published, so you can read them on the EJWOP website. And I'll give you the link for that later in the session as well. Now, first up, we have Lisa Seubert, who will be speaking on behalf of the editorial team. She's going to position the papers for us and talk about their overall contributions before we then move on to each of the individual papers separately. So I'll pass over to Lisa. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you, Ishbel. Welcome everyone to the launch of our special issue from my side. My name is Lisa Seubert and I'm from the University of Innsbruck. And on behalf of the editorial team, I will present the editorial that addresses one of the most critical challenges of today's world of work, precarious employment and work. When we talk about precarious employment or precarious work, we are referring to work that deviates from the standard employment relationship. Those secure, permanent, full-time jobs with social protections many workers, at least in affluent Western societies, took for granted. Instead, we see a rise in instability, insecurity, and a lack of control over the work. This is not a niche issue. According to the ILO, 58% of the global working population operates in the informal economy. And even in Europe, 2 out of 3 salaried workers experience at least one aspect of precarious employment or work, such as temporariness or disempowerment. It affects employees or workers from manual laborers and care workers to those in the public sector. Next, please. Next slide, please. Historically, work and organizational psychology has focused heavily on job insecurity. While important, this one-dimensional view often underestimates the true impact of precarious employment on individuals and society. Our goal with this special issue was to move beyond this. We need to understand the underlying psychological and social processes. We are currently in an era of polycrisis, the aftermath of a pandemic, rising inflation, and geopolitical conflicts, all of which have exacerbated precarious employment and working conditions. As editors, we argue for a shift from neoliberal conceptualizations of work towards socially sustainable models centered on human values. We need to connect individual lived experiences with broader structural conditions and barriers. This special issue showcases research that investigates precarious employment and work multidimensionally with a psychological perspective within diverse jobs and in various contexts. Next slide, please. I am delighted to very shortly introduce 6 papers that provide fresh global insights into this phenomenon. These studies cover a wide range of contexts, including the United States of America, the United Kingdom, Belgium, Finland, India, and Saudi Arabia. From the authors, you will hear more about the papers that contribute several key themes. For example, first, a new measurement tool. Allan and colleagues present a new 28-item work precarity scale to capture systemic uncertainty beyond just job insecurity. Second, the lived experiences of vulnerable work groups. We look at young workers in England during the COVID-19 pandemic, for example, and platform delivery careers in Finland. Third, the black box of mechanism. Holt explored the psychological mechanism on how precarious employment is related to mental health in the healthcare sector. And last but not least, we see insights from non-Western contexts, which are rare in the literature. Crucially, we amplify little heard voices such as domestic migrant gig workers in India and Ugandan domestic workers in Saudi Arabia. These papers use diverse methods from longitudinal surveys to diary studies, from qualitative to quantitative methodology to show how systemic inequality keeps people trapped in cycles of precarity. After my introduction, the authors will dive deeper into these fascinating findings. Next slide, please. To conclude, this special issue is a call to action. Our findings align with several United Nations National Sustainable Development Goals, including decent work, SDG 8, and reduced inequalities, SDG 10. We identify clear implications at 4 levels. At the policy level, we need stronger labor laws, for example, living wages and universal social security coverage. At the organizational level, employers must promote stable contracts and transparent practices in recruitment and career development. On the individual level, we must encourage workers to regain their power through unions, activism, and cooperatives. At the societal level, we need to raise public awareness about the true social cost of precarity. For future research, we urge more longitudinal studies and a focus on hard-to-reach populations. We must continue to examine how AI and algorithmic management, as well as global developments, reshaping work and precarious employment in real time. Thank you for your attention. I will now hand over to our authors to present their specific contributions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. So we'll pass over to our first paper, which is going to be presented by Blake Allan, professor from the University of Houston. Thank you very much, Blake. If you'd like to go ahead and share your slides.
Sure. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being with us. Are you all able to see my slides in full screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So today I'm going to talk about the scale that we developed for work precarity, and I want to give a shout out to my co-authors there. So to give a little bit of a background about this scale, in 2020, during the pandemic, we were invited to write a review article for the Journal of Vocational Behavior's 50th anniversary. And we were asked to do a review article on precarious work. And so our sort of question with this review article was, how do we connect precarious work, which is often measured objectively, with the broader psychological literature, which was touching on a lot of these issues, and how can we really characterize the psychological experiences associated with precarious work? And so the outcome of that review article was this model, which I know is really busy, but if you look on the left side there, it's essentially these contextual pieces like marginalization and economic conditions and policies like neoliberalism, how they set the conditions both for the prevalence of precarious work and dictate who experiences precarious work. And so moving over to the right there, our sort of what we tried to contribute through this article was developing sort of different categories of psychological variables that are associated with holding precarious jobs. And so those are in those three categories of precarity of work, precarity at work, and precarity from work, broadly under this larger construct of work precarity. Sort of the feelings of insecurity and uncertainty associated with holding a precarious job. And then that links to a bunch of outcomes. So just to dive in a little bit deeper are these three forms of work precarity. So precarity of work is uncertainty about occupational future. And so the sort of narrow construct of this is sort of classic job insecurity, worrying about losing your job. But under this umbrella might be things like worried about, is my job still going to exist in a few years because of AI? Or am I going to lose all these sort of social connections associated with my job? Then there's precarity at work, so uncertainty and instability and safety and security in the job, such as experiencing physical injury. And I'll note here, one thing that we were trying to contribute through this paper was arguing that precarious work manifests in a lot of different ways psychologically. So you might actually have a relatively permanent full-time position, but in the United States, for example, there's at-will employment, which means that very limited protections for full-time workers. So you can get fired tomorrow for almost no reason, as long as it's not explicitly illegal. And so you might not have a whole lot of job insecurity in some situations, but you have a lot of fear in everyday work that you're going to be bullied for or discriminated against because of your identities. Then there's precarity from work. So uncertainty and instability that you get sort of outside of work, but from holding a precarious job. So you might constantly worry about paying bills. And what we tried to add through the scale development papers that other folks on the panel have talked about, of sort of a feeling of meaningless or alienation in your general life from holding a precarious job. So we developed a large item pool of 133 items. We did exploratory factor analysis, and we got it down to 28 items. So I'm not going to go through this in detail. You can take a look at this. I'll have a link at the end. But there are sort of different categories of precarity of work, capturing things like technological precarity. Then we have precarity at work, so interpersonal precarity as well as physical precarity. And then we have, fear of union backlash. Then we have that sort of deprivation of basic needs, worrying about being able to support your family, and then sort of a general sense of meaninglessness. And so this was the scale, which we tested in study 2. So one interesting thing we found is there was a pretty strong unidimensional factor, which means all of these subscales tend to hang together, but the correlational model was also strong. So it's sort of strange because it seems like a total score for all the subscales is warranted, but theoretically you could see these things operating independently. But for sort of construct validity tests, we use the total score. So again, this is a busy table, but you can see just the top row there where it says work precarity. You can see it correlating strongly with a lot of variables that it should be associated with, like qualitative job insecurity, of course, precarious work, safety at work, your ability to meet survival needs through work, and also just general stress and mental health. We also tested the incremental validity of work precarity, total score, if it predicted things like precarious work, job precariousness, job insecurity, if it predicted, mental health above and beyond these variables. And you can see in step 2 there, when we added precarious work, it had the largest beta weight, and it added significant variance. We also followed up with our sample in study 2 to do sort of a cross-leg panel model, and basically just establishing that work precarity at time 1 predicted mental health and stress at time 2. And you can see sort of the second half of that paragraph is all the retest reliabilities. So fairly stable across time. People who, this is something, of course, a lot of us talk about is, people can get trapped in precarious jobs. So this is sort of, reflecting that piece of things. So that's basically a little bit about our scale. We developed this 28-item scale and validate it in several different ways. If you want a link to the scale, you can just scan this QR code. Which will give you a link to my website with a number of our other scales as well. I just wanted to sort of say a little bit about where we're going with this scale. So just as an example, one thing that we're looking at is how these experiences of work precarity predict political attitudes, behaviors, and beliefs, looking at things like populist beliefs, anomie, authoritarianism. So that's just one example of sort of the work we're doing right now to kind of try to understand how living in this constant state of uncertainty might predict other sort of broader attitudes and social behaviors. Thank you very much. That's it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Blake. Wonderful to hear about your research and your ongoing research. I will remind everyone that if they have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A and we will respond to them as they come up. And I'm now very delighted to welcome Fiona Christie from Manchester University, who is going to talk us through her paper in the special issue. So if you go ahead and share your screen, Fiona. Thank you.
Okay. I've shared my screen, so can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you very much. I'll go ahead then. So thank you very much for inviting me today and to the editorial team for patience in pushing the paper through the review process, and also just to a shout out to my co-authors, Pete Robertson and Adele Swingewood, as well, who worked with me on this paper. So, and I'm based at Decent Work and Productivity Research Centre at Manchester Met. So our study was very much an exploratory study about young people at a particular point in time during the COVID pandemic, to understand their experiences more. The study was actually conceived prior to the pandemic, but because the pandemic occurred, it obviously pivoted to the kind of unique context that occurred at that time. So, so our questions, and I'm conscious I've taken Ishbel's steer that today I'm going to be really telling people about what our paper's about, and rather than covering every detail of the paper, because you can read it on the EJWOP website for more information. But the aims of what we wanted to do was to explore how young people experience and navigate precarious work, and to what extent young people's needs were met in the context of precarious work, and how young people made meaning of precarious work. So those were our two main questions that we report upon in the article. And I've put in italics there, but adjacent to this, I suppose, was what the value of the psychology of working perspective was in illuminating precarious work. So that's what we aim to report in the article. So, and clearly, we write about this in the article, but the COVID-19 amplified existing concerns about young people and precarious work in the labour market. Certainly the data from the UK and elsewhere really showed how young people were much more vulnerable to the uncertainties that occurred during that time. So our approach, we used a qualitative longitudinal research approach. So very different from what the work that Blake's done, to be able to talk to individuals qualitatively over a period of time at different points in time. We were also guided by reflexive thematic analysis in doing this. So in the article, we very much position ourselves. I certainly am a careers professional by background, who kind of moved kind of later in, as a later career change into kind of having an academic role. So that very much kind of influences how I approach this. I'm also a parent, so of young people. So we acknowledge kind of our positionality in the paper, and the process, the detailed process of the stages of analysis that we went through for the paper and writing the paper. It's based in the Greater Manchester context, so we're obviously based in the region where I live and work, so I was able to capitalise on contacts and so on to do the research. And it was a small scale project, so 21 young people aged between 18 and 30, interviewed twice in 2021. Really, we sort of were fortunate in a way that the 2 points in time of the research coincided with quite different points in time in the pandemic. So actually in the second stage, actually the economy had started to open up quite a lot. Whereas at the first stage, it was much more, we were in a kind of very strong period of lockdown in terms of kind of hospitality industry being shut and so on. So we were able to kind of capture this kind of unique point in time and changes over time. We also, we use the psychology of working theory, which I'm sure many of you will be familiar with. And I feel it's strange to follow Blake Allan speaking, because obviously he's written on this. But I was inspired to use this theory because I'd heard the authors, David Bluestein, Ryan Duffy, talk about this theory. I'd read David Bluestein's book where he'd used some of the concepts from the psychology of working for an older population, older working population in the United States. So we did... this kind of influenced our analysis and the design of the study in many ways. However, we depart. I mean, I've put the concepts from psychology of working on the screen there, but we very distinctly departed from maybe it's the underlying premise of the theory, which is about a model with predictors and moderators and so on. However, what we did, we took that theory, which has very much assembled different concepts from different places. And we were able to kind of use some of the concepts from the theory in an expansive way. And we weren't kind of hemmed in by maybe the notions of the precise kind of definitions of what each of these concepts might mean. So we used it quite expansively, basically. So our findings, and I'm not going to go into these in great detail, but basically two broad themes: career adaptability in uncertain times. We were able to look at the aspects of career adaptability that really stood out from what our participants talked about. We observed amongst young people that very much that uncertainty around time in terms of the future, but also more everyday life that was disrupted for them, due to precarious work. But we also observed actually that for many young people, they were quite optimistic, that they thought that things would get better, which I think that may be a unique feature of young people, that sometimes because of their age or compared to maybe older populations have more of a sense of optimism, really, and also in some cases an ability to improvise and find ways to grow despite precarious work. But we very much observed that social support, so the social resources that people had, the individual resources they had, were really important in insulating against uncertainty. And then another big theme that's in the paper that we write about, we use the kind of work volition concept as an anchoring aspect of this, but we consider how work volition connects to identity, because obviously career identity influences decision making and so on. And we really observed that young people have different rationalizations around this. So for some, especially the artists, the musicians, the dedication to precarious career, they're sort of accepting that. Others, it's rationalized that precarious work was a stopgap, a sort of temporary thing. We had some kind of students in our population, so they're very much kind of rationalizing it as a temporary experience that would end. And then we also had participants who would very much be juggling trade-offs between work factors, and where security or fulfillment and so on, and that sense of trade-offs. And then others where there was much more of a kind of resigned disengagement about work, and a bit more of a hopelessness about possibilities for decent work, really. So it was very interesting, these different rationalizations that people used to kind of explain how they viewed precarious work, really. We've really felt that there was the particular time that we were doing the research, that it kind of almost triggered a heightened level of reflexivity, really, as well, for people to kind of think about where they were at, and to kind of to be able to explore their own relationship to their own context, basically. So yes, the discussion points. So we did observe that some of the psychosocial concepts, work volition, career adaptability, social support, critical consciousness, could insulate young people against the most adverse consequences of precarious work. But also we really observe a kind of a life-wide improvisation to satisfy needs. So in relation to, obviously, psychology of working talks about satisfaction of satisfying needs for decent work, but we noticed that young people, they did draw on resources across their life to satisfy some of those needs that I mentioned in psychology of working, and obviously the role of individual and social resources. But one thing I suppose we do really come out of this is that there were high levels of reflexivity notable. We did think that actually the psychology of working theory was less suited for exploring this, and the other theory, there's lots of theory from sort of more micro-sociological approach, and even some other work on identity that's been published in EJWOP, maybe better explore how people reflexively consider their situation, their life situation, their career situation and context. And then finally, I suppose another point was around, and I'm a practitioner, I'm a careers professional and an employability educator as well. So the research also did raise important questions about critical consciousness, and how this can be fostered helpfully for young people, because we did really find that our young people could be critically conscious. However, it didn't necessarily translate into action, of joining unions and things like that. So even though they kind of could really recognise kind of poor practice and challenges in the labour market and so on. So there's some discussion points. That's my final slide. So hopefully I've not gone over time too much or anything. So, that's me. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, Ishbel.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Fiona. Absolutely wonderful to hear about your research. I really appreciate you taking the time to come and speak today.
Thank you.
I'm now going to pass us on to Taewon from Aalto University in Finland to present your research. Han, lovely to see you. If you can share your screen, that would be great.
Yes, I'm sharing my screen now. Just a moment. Thanks, Ishbel. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, but oh yes, that's it. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so thanks, Ishbel, and thanks everyone for being here today. I'm Han, a doctoral researcher at Aalto University School of Business in Finland, and I'm going to present our paper title, We Are Like Little Elves Who Never Get Their Own Name, Navigating the Experience of Precariousness in Platform Work, on behalf of my co-author, Mikey Dew, who unfortunately can't join us today. So to begin with, I'm not sure why, but these lines of poems keep popping up in my head from time to time whenever I see the app-based food couriers in their bright colors, blue and pink, in the capital of Finland. So I wonder, how do these workers experience precariousness, and how do they navigate their experience in an egalitarian country like Finland? In our study, we focus on digitalized precarious work where algorithms shape the labor process. So the involvement of algorithmic management intensifies certain aspects of precariousness, such as the absence of physical workplace and the lack of work-related communication. We built on job crafting theory. I think many of you are familiar with this theory, so I will not go into detail, but I would like to note that while Aspen research focuses on both task and relational crafting, cognitive crafting has received much less attention. Our research context is app-based food delivery in Finland, which is the most visible type of platform work in the country at the time of our study. So there were two active platforms, Want and Futura, and an interesting contrast is between the precarious situations of the food couriers and the Finnish egalitarian welfare system. We collected our data between July 2023 and March 2024 from 3 different data sources, including semi-structured interviews with 20 couriers. And I also spent 10 hours shadowing one courier working in Helsinki area to understand the actual working conditions of these couriers. In addition, we also collected secondary data from different Finnish media news outlets, and that enables us to triangulate our data and to have a better understanding of the context and also of the phenomenon. We didn't start with Seubert on theoretical framework on decent work and precarious work, but we found it very useful in analyzing our data, especially when it came to identifying different aspects of precariousness. So these are the 5 dimensions of decent work. A low level of these dimensions indicates precariousness. This is a summary of our findings. I will not go into detail, but I will briefly walk you through the findings. So we identified 4 different aspects of precariousness experienced by our participants, including uncertainty of work and income, unsocial nature of work, unprotected work environment, and unrecognized work efforts. And these 4 aspects correspond to the first 4 dimensions of Seubert on theoretical framework, except for the 5th one on meaningful work. We think maybe because of the monotonous and the lonely nature of this type of work that these workers less likely find this type of work as meaningful to them. In addition, I would like to note that the app-based food delivery work characteristic, such as the algorithmic opacity, where the workers didn't really understand how algorithms assign tasks or calculated their payment, and also due to algorithmic management, these workers, they didn't really have a supervisor to ask for advice or a physical workplace to socialize. So these characteristics exacerbated their experience of precariousness. And these are two examples of unprotected work environment. During one winter field trip, the courier reported having accidents during work, for example, like falling on slippery road or being hit by another car during his work. Due to poor visibility, you can see that his car door was in quite bad condition after the accident. And to navigate the experience of precariousness, this worker engaged in different job crafting mechanisms, including trick using, positive framing, normalizing, and future envisioning. So many of them view this type of work as a temporary phase or a stepping stone to a more promising future. So through future envisioning, they kind of have a sense of resilience and to stay resilient in when they in the face of precarious work experience. Our paper also has some theoretical contributions, limitation, and suggestion for future research, which I will not go into detail, but you can find when reading our paper. Thanks a lot for listening. I hope I didn't go too fast. I was a little bit nervous. Thank you. I will stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you so much, Han. That was fantastic. Great to hear about your research. Thanks so much. We'll now move on to our next presentation, which is a paper by Maija Hult and colleagues from the University of the Southeastern Finland University of Applied Sciences in Finland. Unfortunately, Maija wasn't able to join us today, and so Christian Seubert, who was the action editor for this paper, is going to present the paper on her behalf. So thank you very much, Christian, for stepping in, and please do go ahead and share your screen when you can.
Okay, thanks, Ishbel. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so welcome also from my side, everyone. Today I'm presenting a study by Maija Hult and colleagues, and it's titled Explaining the Relationship Between Precarious Employment Conditions and Mental Health Among Healthcare Workers, the Mediating Role of Psychological Experience of Work Precarity. As Ishbel just said, Maija is unable to attend, so in my role as the action editor of the paper, I'm glad to step in and present the slides she prepared. Okay, let's get started. The link between precarious employment and poor mental health is quite well established in epidemiological research. However, in the healthcare sector specifically, staff shortages, flexibilization, and ongoing budget pressures have amplified workers' exposure to precarious conditions. Despite this evidence, the specific mechanisms, that is the black box, through which precarious employment actually affects mental health, remain poorly understood, especially in healthcare settings. And that gap is exactly what the study set out to address. The study draws on the work precarity framework proposed by Allan and colleagues. We're already made familiar with that framework in a way. The key idea is that objective precarious employment conditions, things like contract type, low pay, lack of rights, do not affect mental health directly. Instead, they operate through subjective psychological experiences, feelings of uncertainty, anxiety, and powerlessness. So the framework bridges the materialist epidemiological tradition with a psychological perspective by positioning subjective experience as the explanatory mechanism. The main aim of the study was to empirically test whether these subjective psychological experiences mediate the relationship between precarious employment and mental health outcomes. specifically burnout and mental health well-being. The study focuses on healthcare workers in Belgium and Finland, two countries that share several societal similarities, including strong collective bargaining coverage and comparable GDP per capita, making them quite well suited for testing this framework. So here's what the authors actually did. They conducted a large cross-sectional survey in 2023 with over 9,000 healthcare workers, about 4,600 from Belgium and 4,400 from Finland, recruited mainly through trade unions. Precarious employment was measured with the EPRES-BE, that is the Belgium version, more developed version of the EPRES scale, which captures 8 dimensions: temporariness, disempowerment, vulnerability, rights or lack of rights, enforceability of rights, working times, wages, and training. Mental well-being was assessed with a EJWOP index and burnout with a burnout assessment tool, the 4-item version. Structural equation modeling was used to test the mediation and moderation effects, and common method bias was assessed and found to be low. 3 mediators were chosen to represent 3 levels of the work precarity framework. Job insecurity captures precarity of work, the fear and uncertainty about job continuity. Moral distress represents precarity at work, that is the psychological suffering when nurses cannot act according to their ethical beliefs due to institutional constraints. Work-life imbalance reflects precarity from work, the spillover of demanding job conditions into private life. And additionally, calling, that is the sense of meaningful pro-social work, was tested as a moderating resource that might buffer these negative effects. Okay, what did the authors find? As hypothesized, all 3 mediators, job insecurity, moral distress, and work-life imbalance, significantly mediated the effects of precarious employment on the left side on both burnout and mental health well-being on the right side. There were also significant direct effects of precarious employment on the outcomes, meaning the mediations were partial rather than full. Regarding the moderation effects, calling, which you see at the bottom of the screen, significantly buffered the effect of work-life imbalance on both outcomes. That is, the higher the calling, the smaller the negative impact on mental health well-being, and the smaller the increase in burnout. The other moderation effects were not significant, and in total, the model explained about 54% of the variance in burnout and 66% in mental health. Mental well-being. What do these findings mean in practice? First, they underscore the importance of improving employment conditions in healthcare, not just contracts, but also the psychosocial work environment. Reducing moral distress requires addressing staffing levels, ethical constraints, and giving nurses a genuine voice in decision-making. Supporting work-life imbalance or supporting work-life balance through predictable schedules and manageable workload is equally critical. And these steps are not only important for protecting workers' mental health, but also for retaining staff in a sector already struggling with severe shortages. To sum it up, the study demonstrated that subjective psychological experiences, job insecurity, moral distress, and work-life imbalance explain how objective precarious employment conditions harm mental health. It is one of the first empirical operationalizations of the work precarity framework by means of proxy variables, admittedly, and shows that an interdisciplinary approach combining epidemiological and psychological perspectives is essential for fully understanding these effects. The authors argue that addressing precarious employment in nursing and healthcare should be treated as a public health and workforce sustainability priority. Thank you for your attention. If you're interested in reading the full open access paper, we encourage you to do so. For questions, you can reach the first author, Maria Hult, at the email address shown. I hope this study inspires further work bridging occupational health and work psychology. Thank you very much for listening. So far from my side, and I will now stop sharing the screen again.
Thank you so much, Christian. I really appreciate you stepping in to present that paper for the authors who were unable to join us today. It's fantastic that you were able to help us. A reminder to everybody that there is a Q&A section of the page, so if you have any questions for any of our speakers, please do go ahead and pop those in there. We do have an excellent question already from Andre from the University of Lausanne, so I would direct our panelists to please take a look at Andre's excellent question and pop your thoughts in there for him as well. And without further ado, we'll pass on to our next speakers, who we have Shipra Shaiwalini from Institute of Management Technology in Ghaziabad in India. Shipra, it's wonderful to have you with us to present your research. Please do go ahead and share your screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ishbel. I'll share my screen.
Thank you, everyone. My co-author Shipra will be presenting. So Shipra, can you please share your screen?
Yes, ma'am. Is it visible?
Not yet.
It's just loading up. And yes, sorry, Gunjan, I did not introduce you. Welcome also to the co-author of this paper, Gunjan, also from the same University Institute in India. Wonderful that you're both able to join us. Thank you so much for coming so late in the day.
Yeah, I hope it's visible now.
Okay. Yeah, it's visible now. You can start.
Yeah, so greetings, everybody, and thank you for having us. So I'm here to present our paper exploring the lived experiences of internal migrant gig workers. Now, the aim of our research was to understand how do the internal migrant workers navigate the precarity inherent in gig employment, why do they persist, and what aspirations do they have for their future despite facing such adversities. Now, let us begin with an understanding of what precarity means for internal migrant workers in India. Now, many workers migrate from rural areas like the states of Bihar and Uttar Pradesh to metropolitan cities like Delhi in search of better work opportunities, but are disproportionately employed in informal roles, majorly in the gig employment, with irregular income, no proper work contracts, and minimal legal recourse. Now, this results in conditions of precariousness, employment that is chronically insecure, poorly protected, and highly contingent on market fluctuations. And this is the reality of millions of internal migrant workers in India's gig economy. So today I would like to share what we learned when we examined their lived experiences. So we studied the lived experiences of 43 internal migrant gig workers in India using the lens of capability approach. Now, this is a framework that asks not just how much do people earn, but what freedoms do they actually have to live the lives they value? So we interviewed the ride-share drivers, food delivery workers, domestic workers, salon services, construction workers across Delhi NCR. And what struck us most powerfully was the gap between what they aspired and what they actually achieved. Now, through our reflexive thematic analysis, we came up with 5 overarching themes which reflect the realities of these workers. Now, the first theme was work-related precariousness, which had 5 subdimensions. First one, multiple intersecting challenges. Like workers described a convergence of crises that compounded their hardships, financial insecurity, health vulnerabilities, erratic work availability often intersected. Now, second, denial of dignity. Low-wage workers often experience a denial of their basic humanity. Next, illusion of choice. Unfavorable working conditions are frequently accepted by workers out of need. Structural disability. Workers in precarious employment encounter systemic obstacles that impede career growth. And skill-based polarization. High-skilled professionals are doing well, but these low-skilled workers are falling behind. Now, the second theme was urban migration challenges. Migration, though often undertaken with hopes of upward mobility, it entails exposure to legal uncertainty and social marginalization. It's a trade-off between opportunity and risk because relocating is a calculated risk. And because of this, the workers have this profound sense of displacement and uncertainty. Now, these risks, they deepen the workers' precarious standing. Now, the third theme, they experience a profound liminal existence, perpetually caught between, their villages and cities, between, being newcomer and local, between survival and stability. So these workers feel perpetually unsettled. Now, we also saw certain survival strategies, like some of them said they diversified their income sources, then they saved during high peak seasons. Then they also build informal support networks. They invest in upskilling, and most of them planned to stay. So they had this long-term planning despite facing uncertainty. Now, here's what is truly important now. Now, despite these hardships, these workers articulated clear visions of what they needed to flourish. So we identified 13 desired functionings, what workers actually want to flourish. And as we can see, they come under several domains, like the economic factors, the social relation factors, personal development. But the most widely valued was health and secure housing. Now, our research prioritizes the experiential voices of marginalized workers. The inductive emergence of these functionings from workers' narratives underscores the importance of contextual specificity, and it aligns more closely with Amartya Sen's pluralistic and democratic vision of justice. Now, so what does this mean for policy, practice, and research? Now, for policymakers, a move from theoretical rights to usability, this one-size-fits-all solution will not work. We have to move beyond that. For practitioners, make accountability, put accountability into the mechanism, support the worker organizing like unions. For researchers, adopting participatory research, centering the workers' voice, and above all, recognizing the workers' humanity and advocating for structural transformation and social inclusion. Now, 3 essential points that we wish to make through our research. Precarity is multidimensional. It's not just economic, it's social, psychological, even identity-based. Workers are not passive victims, they're active agents, and they demand transformation. And any solution must be participatory, design policies with workers, not just for them. And finally, I encourage our viewers to read our paper, and thank you for your attention and time.
Thank you so much, Shipra and Gunjan, for sharing your research with us. Wonderful to get your insights from your research. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll now pass on to our final speaker, who is Area 1B, coming from the University of Saarland in Germany. Area, I will share your slides for you. So if you just let me know when you want to move on to the next slide, that will be perfect.
Thank you very much, Ishbel. Thank you everyone who has attended our webinar. My name is Area 1B. I'm going to present a paper that I conducted together with Cornelius Kunish and Nida Badjo. They're all both attending. And this research, we investigated the influence of job demands and job resources on the health of migrant domestic workers using a diary study with Ugandan housemaids who were employed in Saudi Arabia. And let's just move on to the next slide. In our introduction, why we decided to carry out this research, we realized that about over 11 million migrant domestic workers worldwide, 80% of them are female. But this a group that is mostly vulnerable to precarious conditions, which include long hours of work, low pay, exploitation, among very many other kinds of precarious conditions. We cannot talk about all of them. But then what keeps them in these precarious conditions, one might wonder. We realize that based on the theory of psychology, working theory, we realize that mostly economic disparities are keeping them working under these precarious conditions. Let's move to the next slide. And for example, for Ugandan workers, about 77,000 of them were deployed in Saudi Arabia alone in 2022. That's really a great number. And so we were perturbed by that and we said, hey, these guys probably experience, because of the conditions that they go through, experience a lot of emotional, physical, and psychological health challenges, and which we thought that probably we could find out what exactly they experience so that we can make an element out there that decent work is really of essence to migrant domestic workers. And so we use the job demands and resources theory of Bakker and others, of course applying it to a rarely studied group of informal workers who are of low status, are not normally the ones that have good jobs. And so what informed our theorization and everything is to try to understand the impact of migrant domestic work on the health of the workers using a diary study method. Yes, let's continue. And our theory that we used, I already talked about it, is the job demands theory, which talks about two processes. The first process is the health impairment process, and the second is the motivation process. Under the health impairment process, it assumes that job demands, which are the aspects that require sustained effort from the worker, and they lead to strain and exhaustion. They lead to health impairment of the worker, and so they cannot be able to work functionally in the workplace. And the motivation process is basically about the job resources that contribute to the workers' achievement of goals that they set, or the organizational goals. And basically, because we've already said that this group of migrant domestic workers is very vulnerable to precariousness, we thought it's needless for us to investigate the motivational process, but rather focus on the health impairment process and make an element there that there is need for issues to be addressed within migrant domestic work. And the beauty about the theory that we chose, the job demands and resources theory, is it's applicable to different job types, contexts, including the informal jobs that we studied in workers. Next slide. And so what did we do? We first of all had qualitative interviews with people that are involved within the migrant work. We had interviews with managers from recruitment firms. We had interviews with former migrants and migrants who were there already to establish what they determine as job demands and job resources, so that we can quantitatively now assess their impact altogether. And within that, we found that work pressure, family demands, sexual harassment, and work precarity itself. I will briefly talk about what we looked at in work precarity. We looked at hours of work. We looked at hours of sleep. We looked at the number of days worked, and it's quite amazing if you look at it in that aspect of work precarity, how these guys really are affected. And then the job resources, we were informed by, of course, the coiners of job demands and resources theory, who say that there are two most important resources for any kind of job. That's autonomy and social support. And this is also the same that Hopeful also agrees with. And so we investigated, as I told you, the health impairment process. And basically for it looks at the negative health outcomes of doing work. And so we looked at emotional exhaustion and somatic complaints. That's what we looked at. Next slide. We also, by the way, investigated sleep quality, but because the scale was really low, we were not able to include it in the final model that we investigated. So next slide to our methodology. And under our methodology, the research design, as I said, it was a diary study. We had the first initial data collection at the training centers. And as you can see, the sample was 700. And then we had 4 repeated data collections on a 2-weekly basis, bi-weekly basis. While they are in Saudi Arabia, we use the same group, and the final population was 172, and it gave us 366 observations during the analysis. And as you can see, the data collection was with WhatsApp chatbot. I will show you in the next slide how the chatbot was designed. We used short questionnaires, which are really standard, and they have also been used by other researchers to collect data, especially in various studies. And work precarity index was, of course, those factors that I told you that we came up to measure what is specific for migrant domestic workers. Some of the, we made sure that we take care of all the ethical concerns, including if the worker, as we give them this chatbot to answer, had concerns, because they always had concerns. There was a specific number where they were directed to call for some guidance, counseling, and immediate help. So we had that because it was a long study. And some of the challenges is, of course, as I told you, there are a lot of precarious conditions that are experienced by the migrant domestic workers. Some of them are the increased rate of organ trafficking, and that affected so much our data collection. For example, the initial data collection sample that we started with when they migrated was about 300, but there was a counter message towards what we were sending for them to encourage them to fill out, which outweighed everything that we were doing, because they said, hey, this number, if you click on it, if you click on the link and text it to the chat, they will gather information and it will lead to organ trafficking. So that affected so much how we raised our final sample. So next slide. This is how the data collection happened, the initial data collection. As you can see here, we were explaining to them how to respond to the questionnaires. And on the one on the right, we were helping them to understand how to use the chatbot, because once they migrate, we use only those that migrated to Saudi Arabia. They would only interact with us using the WhatsApp chatbot. Just to let you know that we collected this data during the time of around 2020 to 2023. That's when we collected this data. And also partly why most of them are not able to migrate is because at that time, because of the precarious conditions that happened in Saudi Arabia, the government of Uganda put a temporary suspension on exportation of labor to Saudi Arabia, so it also affected how the export was happening during that time. That's why we were not able to raise the number. Next slide. Yeah, and this is how the chatbot looks like. We some of them we thought that they would prefer to us in English written, so we designed one that would help them to answer in that manner. And we also, on the right, as you can see, we also made the audios, because some of them they perpetuate that they know English and they can be able to work well, but yet their education levels are really low and they cannot comprehend. So we translated it to the local language so they could be able to listen to the audio and respond in the audio. And then here we get the number according to how we have been able to capture it. So those were the variations that we did to make sure that the data is good. Next slide. And so our findings, we used an machine approach in our studio, and we found that family demands positively predicted emotional exhaustion and somatic complaints. And we found that autonomy we predicted both health outcomes of emotional exhaustion and somatic complaints. Social support unexpectedly positively related to emotional exhaustion and somatic complaints. I'll say a little bit about it in the findings, which is in the discussion, which is on the next page. Work pressure, sexual harassment, work precarity, for them they did not significantly affect the health outcomes. And we also used course self-evaluation as a moderator, and it only moderated the relationship between autonomy and emotional exhaustion. And yeah, the rest, it did not moderate. Next slide. So in light with our findings, we discussed that non-work-related demands, such as family demands, increase the burden on the worker and they become detrimental to the employee. Just to tell you a little bit more again about the job demands and resources theory, The demands may originate from the real workplace or outside the worker's context, but as long as they affect his or her execution of the job, and likewise the resources, they come from out or within the workplace, and it can affect the worker's health. So non-work related demands such as family are really very crucial, and so suggest that there should be a way of helping the workers to handle the family demands. Work pressure, sexual harassment, and work precarity, them not being significant. It only shows that there are other salient factors that probably we do not take care of that affected them and might be very strong. This can be seen from arguments of Hopeful and Duffy. For example, for the migrant workers who are coming from the global south and countries, it could be that it's the economic pressures back at home which are pushing them, but it doesn't mean that work pressure and sexual harassment and all the other things do not matter. But also there is need to accord employees some level of job autonomy because it was really very, as you can see, it was significant throughout. Migrant domestic workers also need to be helped to go beyond social support because they usually receive it from family members and friends. And these family members and friends usually exert a lot of, accept a lot of support again from them in regards to remittances, in regards to the pressures, the responsibilities that they leave at home. And so instead of helping them, maybe they further precarize them. And then cognitive traits like course evaluation are very instrumental for employees, at least from my research. Next slide. So for policy and practice, these are not the only ones that we can draw from our paper, but they are just at least enough for us to be guided on what exactly this paper will help the people out there who would want to benefit from it in a practical manner. Pre-departure trainings should include enhancement of personal resources, for example, course evaluation, and a bit of self-regulation and management of work, family roles, and excessive job demands. This is not to apportion the blame on the workers that they're supposed to live by the conditions, but we are only saying that as we agitate for the conditions to get better, at least the workers should be helped to become agents and not only passive victims, because this further precarizes them and affects their mental health. And then there needs to be advocacy programs aimed at ensuring job resources circulate, such as granting employees some degree of autonomy and support. This really is not there, and yet if the workers have autonomy over their work, it would really improve, as we have seen, their mental health and their performance at work. And then to go beyond the social support that is given by the family members and the friends, which in itself we saw that it's dysfunctional, we propose that a 24/7 helpline should be open to the workers where they can be able to report the challenges that they're experiencing. And not only report, but also to be helped to advise them how they can be able to overcome them or remove them from the workplaces where they feel, hey, it's challenging for them. And re-examining migrant domestic worker, especially the kafala system. This kafala system is really a bit of a challenge, much as there have been efforts to try and streamline it, but it's still very, very favoring to only the sponsor. It gives them more powers over the worker, and in its sense, it affects how the worker's work experience results. And then lastly, there needs to be policies and protocols designed for reporting unfair work practices and workplace abuse such as sexual harassment and all the others. Much as these factors will not be significant, when you look at their needs, they will really very high. And so we suggest that there is need for protocols and how this can be mitigated because they really affect the workers' health. And the last slide. In conclusion, this study underscores the need for comprehensive research to better understand the unique work environment of migrant domestic workers and the policies and interventions which could help to redesign and improve their working conditions and overall employee health to achieve decent work. And the very last one, sorry, We want to thank you from Zealand University, Professor Komish and Dr. Nida Badger and myself. We say thank you, and if you want to read about our work, you can scan the QR code and then you can be able to access it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Aria. It's great to hear your presentation. It really brings the research to light. So it's wonderful to hear you speaking about it. Thank you for joining us today. I think across all of these papers presented today, you can see just the breadth of contribution from all of our scholars and researchers who have been working on the papers in the special issue. And I'd like to just take a moment, just to add everybody now back onto the screen, just to say a huge thank you to you all for joining us today as part of this event. It's been wonderful to hear from you all firsthand about the amazing research that you're all doing. It really is really important work and touching the lives of so many people across the globe. It's wonderful to see the work that's happening in such diverse ways within our discipline. So thank you for all you're doing, and please do keep doing it. I'd like to thank everybody for attending the webinar more generally. It's been wonderful to have you all with us and just to have such an interest from people about the research that we're doing. On the screen, I've put a few links there for you. The first will take you directly to the special issue through the European Journal of Work and Organisational Psychology, so you'll be able to access the papers there, and all the contact details for the researchers will be available on those papers as well. I have put my email address there just in case you're not able to reach somebody. Feel free to email me and I will help you to connect with anybody who's doing this important research. The middle link there is to the EJWOP Impact Incubator website, so that you can see the other resources that we have around precarious work and decent work. The briefing papers, there's various resources around living wages and other types of pieces of research as well. So you can find those by looking under the decent work topic or by going directly into the resources tab. So please do make use of those resources. They're all freely available. Just once again, a huge thank you to you all for joining us. Please do get in touch if you'd like to be involved in our work on precarious work. And thank you again to all of our speakers. It's been a wonderful presentation. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ishbel, for the great preparation. Thanks all.
Okay.